Hi, I'm Igiaba Scego. I'm a Somali Italian writer, and I'm so happy to be here with our distinguished guests, Peter Brathwaite and Theophilus Imani Marboha. I'm a big fan of your project. And we are here to a new edition of the festival Afropean Bridges. It's a festival of the International Center of Humanities and Social Change, Ca' Foscari University, Venice. One day, I hope after the pandemic, after the COVID-19, we'll meet all together in a campo, a Venice square, with a coffee and a beautiful landscape, chat and enjoy life. I hope so. I introduce our guest now, but I don't want to talk a lot because our guests are really special and it's unique opportunity for us to hear their voices. Peter Brathwaite, you are British opera singer, a baritone. You are a man of many talents, but most recently, you have been the shining star of the Getty Museum Challenge. The Getty Museum set a challenge for people across social media to recreate their favorite pieces of art using only what they had in their homes. But you did, I think, something more than a challenge. You used the challenge as a platform to explore the history of Black portraiture. You, Peter Brathwaite, have captured in a unique and wonderful way the spirit of works of art across the ages and drawn attention to stories that have been too long neglected. Black history. And Theophilus Imano Marboha, you have been trained in medicine and surgery at the University of Pavia, Italy. Alongside your medical education, you have cultivated a big interest in African diaspora studies and visual culture studies, with a special focus on contemporary African and African diaspora art. Your attention to Black visual art have produced Echi e Accordi, a digital series that has been the subject of a scholarly interest. You both analyze the changing relationship between Africa and Europe through the lives of individual Africans who in some manner dealt with Europeans. You show in a beautiful way our identity as Afro-Europeans. We are Afro-Europeans. And you shows the notion of race and racial difference were relatively fluid until the 7th century. For example, here in the Mediterranean world in particular, religious difference was often more of a dividing line than skin color. And Africans rose to prominent position in Europe. With your picture, you show us people like a Black gondolier, Carpaccio gondolier in Venice during the Renaissance, or Alessandro de' Medici, the son of an African servant in the powerful Medici household in Florence, who became the Duke of Florence in 1531. It would be great if you can start just telling us a bit about yourself, both of you, who you are, what you do in your daily life, and above all, how you came into this engagement with a Black portraiture. What do you mean for you, your project?
I'm an opera singer. That's my main job. I sing a variety of concert repertoire, recitals, and on the operatic stage in opera productions. And aside from that, I'm also a writer and broadcaster, primarily working for the BBC. And a large part of my career to date has been trying to platform voices that don't necessarily get to be heard. And so one of my big projects is to uncover music that was banned by the Third Reich in Germany and Austria during the 1930s. And that has developed into an ongoing project to show the kinds of artists that were targeted, and that many of these artists, primarily Jewish artists and Black musicians as well, were the lead cultural envoys of the day. And so that's a very definite strand that runs through my work, and the Getty Museum Challenge in a way has been a progression of that work, and the idea of whose stories are told, which stories have we heard, and why haven't we heard certain stories, and so this project has been a way for me to delve into the visual culture that we have and that we might not know, and just see which voices have been neglected and excluded from the canon of Western art that we know so well, and it's been such a wonderful journey for me, because I've learned about so many individuals that I didn't know about before, and there's still so much work to be done in terms of exploring the history of these people, and unlike most characters I encounter in opera, they are real people. They lived real lives, and we know very little about them in many cases, and this is something that has interlinked with my own heritage. I'm of Barbadian British heritage, and the descendant of both plantation owners and enslaved Africans, and I have spent a lot of time researching my ancestors who were enslaved, but the details are few and far between. Sometimes you get a name, but it's not even their real name. It was a name that was given to them on a plantation, and this was on my mind when I was working through the project. And so there are all these themes of Black Britishness and colonialism and enslavement and the diaspora, and what it means to be looking at these images, this material today in Britain, in England, in the 21st century.
And you?
I'm a medical student in my last 2 years of my education, and I just happen to love painting and photography. And with my project, where I juxtapose canonical European paintings with images hailing from different parts of the diaspora, I just wanted to translate my in-between experience as a Ghanaian subject born and raised here in Italy. And I wanted to show this dual backgrounds that inform my daily experience. So I just found this way to communicate this experience of mine.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you both have this in-between experience, and I want to ask you, who is your favorite character in your project? If you have, I don't know really, but I in my work I have always one favorite more than others. So, if you want to begin, Mr. Brathwaite.
Okay. There are a few. I always enjoy when I encounter a musician. So there's the Alfred Schindler painting, the portrait of a gardener and horn player in the court of Francis I, and he sat in a window, and he's holding his French horn. And I didn't realize at the time when I first encountered the painting that he was called Emmanuel Rio. And a few months later, I revisited the Institute of Chicago's website and saw that in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, they'd actually renamed the portrait of Emmanuel Rio. And I thought this was wonderful because it meant that I could then go and research this person who was taken from Brazil to Austria and was a court musician, and tried to progress in a musical career, but because of his skin color, wasn't able to do that. And And so, yeah, there's a real connection with him and who he was, and trying to fill the blanks really of his life. And yeah, I'd love to know more about him, because yeah, it's not really certain what happened to him. He played in an orchestra, in a band, and then disappears from the records. And the last we hear of him is that some items of clothing that belonged to him were sold at auction, and the trail goes cold there.
And you, Mr. Imani, do you have a favorite painting or a favorite character? Although I don't know really, but I'm so curious to know.
There are quite a few diptychs that I really like, and one of them is a pairing where I juxtapose a painting by Caravaggio, Bacchus by Caravaggio, and a photograph taken by an American anthropologist in Congo, and is a photograph of a Congolese chief, and the images are pretty similar in their composition. And what struck me the most was that the photograph is in the archive of the Museum of Natural History in the United States, and it made me quite think about how the representation of the black figure is positioned within the visual culture, because images such as the one of the chief, like the question I asking myself is why such picture is archived in a Museum of Natural History, as if the black figure was not a human figure, but rather an animal subject. So by juxtaposing these two images, I wanted to show how this African chief is dignified as the boy painted by Caravaggio. So I think this is one of my favorite diptychs.
Yeah, it's so amazing, really amazing. And I want to come back to your project, but before I want to ask about your identity, because it's something strange identity. We are in between. We are between Africa and Europe, and Africa, Europe, and South America and Central America. It's a big confusion and history, because we are made of history in a way. And I want to ask you, what for you is Europe? For you, what does it mean, Europe, for you and for your identity and for your life? And Africa, of course, because we are both of them. Yeah. If you want to begin, Mr. Brathwaite.
It's a tricky one to answer. I'd say it's very difficult to understand what Europe means to me, being British, especially at this moment. And I suppose I've always felt European growing up in England, because of the proximity. But also there's an aspect of culture that is specifically English and British. But I think it's very, my identity is very much informed by my upbringing and the heritage I've inherited from my mother, who is from the Caribbean. And then again, researching family history, I found European ancestry, French and Ghanaian and Scottish, and all of these things come into play. And I think something that has come out of this moment of the pandemic is the connectivity and us talking here today, and the idea of a global identity. And I'd say that I feel that greater than anything else at this moment in time, especially given that this is something that is this moment is all encompassing. It is a global struggle, and so I think that for me is keenly felt in this moment.
Yeah. And you, Mr. Imani?
Despite being born and raised here, like I really don't feel much connected to to the country, and I really find it difficult to define myself as European or Italian. But I try to find similarities among different Black experiences across Europe and across the globe. Because despite having our own specificities, because the Black experience here in Italy is different from the Black experience in France or Germany, for instance. We know that we share common roots, and so what I find most interesting is to search for this diasporic resources that inform our daily experience and articulate our daily experience of the society, of the European society that we find ourselves into.
Yeah, it's true. It's difficult to explain our identities, above all in Italy, because yeah, it's so different, north and south of Italy, and you are Italian like me, so but we are different in a way because north and south is not the same in this country. So it's quite amazing thing. And another question is about objects, because you use in a you have, of course, two different projects, but you use object a lot. A part of the Getty challenge is to utilize in a creative way object found at home.
Yeah.
And I want to know, Mr. Brathwaite, why you choose this object and no other object at home, or when you choose this object, and what do you mean for you, and why for one painting and not another painting? Because it's quite interesting when I see picture and say, oh my God, this is interesting to use our daily life object for art. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's something that I developed as the project went on. I realized that actually this can be a way of elevating some of these elements of the everyday that are from my own experience, of growing up, and things that often I kept to myself, and it just didn't seem appropriate to talk about these things when I was younger and growing up in the north of England, and it didn't seem relevant. And so, in a way, it's like withholding a part of yourself to fit in. And so I've used the project to really connect with some things that have been in my life for a very long time, and I haven't necessarily acknowledged them in the way that I should. And this is called a cuckoo stick, and it was carved by my grandfather. And these are an everyday object in the Caribbean, and they were used in enslaved communities to cook the national dish, which is cornmeal with okra.
Okra. I love
it. Delicious. So it's a simple dish. The dish is called cuckoo. And I've used this in so many of my recreations. And it was especially poignant to use it in the recreation of the Past and Treasure, which is the image of the young man sat at the end of a table. It was created in 1665. And there are signifiers of his ancestry, his heritage in the painting. There's a conch shell, which presumably references his Caribbean background, and he also has a monkey on his shoulder. And it felt important to put something like this in the painting, in the recreation, just to give him some agency, as well as the West African fabrics I was using in that recreation. Giving him an object like this felt as if I was allowing him space to breathe and to express his own experience. And maybe he would have eaten a dish similar to the dish that's made with this stick. And it's really allowed me to connect with those characters in a really personal way, as well as elevating things like this. And another object I have here is the patchwork quilt, which was made by my grandmother, and this is a tradition that extends from the west coast of Africa through the Middle Passage to the Caribbean, and now in the diaspora, and it's really there's an emotional weight to using these fragments of identity that are some way cast across the globe, as if they've been sort of thrown and scattered, and bringing them into this space, into the photo recreations, is a chance to celebrate them, but also to consider what it means to create identity as well. And this image, the Past and Treasure, is definitely one of my favorites, because it allowed me to really explore these quite jarring elements of my own identity, and explore the idea of commodity as well. And in the original, the young man is there, but he's not really there, because he's dressed as a sort of Greek god, and you don't really see him. You see a collection of objects, and that was the sole purpose of the painting.
Yes, wonderful, really wonderful. And I want to ask you, Mr. Imani, the same question, but about color, because I see your project, and I see that you choose paintings with a lot of color. And what do you mean for you color inside the painting that you choose for Instagram project?
I think like each color conveys a particular emotion and a particular meaning, and I always find I like to find this parallel between how we see images and how we interpret images and colors specifically when we look at a work of art, and how we interpret, like, let's say, a color when we look, for instance, at an X-ray imaging. Because, for instance, if you look at an X-ray, we know that a specific color, we know that the position of, let's say, a white spot where, like, a black background is supposed to be, for instance, it means that there is a certain abnormality in the patient. And so, like, each color for me represents this metaphor that signifies the presence of something, or the absence of something. So, with the specificity of the project, I think I don't pay much attention to the color of the painting, but rather the composition of the painting, and I try to match that composition with the composition of another photograph. But yeah, we can, if we want, we can also find some meanings in the color. But I think the meaning with the example of the painting in my case, and how I try to look at the images is secondary.
Oh wow. And yeah, it's so different projects, but in a way you are in the same issue because you face the same monster in a way, you know? And in your project, the both of you, it's a fun and big challenge in a way because in you try to decolonize our narrative. So I ask you, what do you mean for you during the project and after the project, of course, face colonialism and the power of the empire? Because you work with this issue, the empire.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a huge subject and reality, really, and we're still dealing with this and working out how to deal with it. And I'm really interested in the concept of decolonizing the mind, the mental space, and the symbols that we have previously held above other things, and the way I've approached that has always been through humor and lightness, because I need to connect with this joy, this black joy, to be able to tackle it and to persist with it, because it is emotionally quite heavy. But the humor has been a route into it, and the only way I can explain this is that it's a continuation of masquerade traditions, carnivalesque,
Carnival.
and all of these things, and the method of subversion and playing out certain things to create a culture of healing. I really believe that by doing this myself, I have been able to engage in a meaningful way with this history. And it's been interesting listening and watching how this has played out on social media and what people say, because I think they're often, they find comfort in the fact that this is a gentle entry into difficult history. I think at the moment, when we're all searching for ways to meaningfully come to terms with this history, but I don't think we can underestimate the power of the imagination and of joy and humor as well.
Important. And you, Mr. Imani, what do you think about face this monster of colonialism and empire?
I
And
think
above all, Italian colonialism, because it's here is a huge,
yeah.
huge problem.
I think that each, I think the decolonial practice or decolonial work in general is a kind of work of repair. In a way, we are trying to fill the void that were created on purpose to eclipse and to obliterate our presence and our experience. So I think that we are just okay. I just try to propose new sentences in the same language so that people who speak the same language can receive the message that I try to convey. So yeah, for me, like this decolonial work is especially a work of repair.
Yeah. Another thing that I want to ask is about popularity of your work, because many people love your projects, and they try to do the same on internet, on Instagram. And I want to know, did it surprise you, the big success of your project, or not? And above all, what do you think about media involved in it? Because I read a lot of article about your project in a different magazine, for example, BBC, Italian magazines, and so on. What do you think about popularity of your project? So, because it's amazing, the people love you a lot.
Yeah, I find it extraordinary, really. I didn't really expect it to be as popular as this, and but I suppose there's an appetite for things that you haven't seen before, and I mean, yeah, these images aren't new, but they're new to so many people because of the way history has been told and the narratives we have received. So I do think that there is a hunger to enrich the history we already have. And I always feel like this isn't about creating a new art history, or it's there. It's just a case of having a level playing field where different voices are allowed and given space to be heard.
Yeah. And you, Mr. Imani?
Yeah, I was also a bit surprised that of on the way the project was received, and of course, like it made me happy that so many people, that the project resonated with many people, and like I didn't begin the project like to gain more followers or to gain, let's say, a sort of popularity. And in fact, like the hashtag that I used to accompany the project was only the title of the project, because I thought that I didn't want the images to get lost in the flood of images on Instagram. So I just wanted to be low key and stay in my own, let's say, backyard and try to do this project. Eventually, like when I started the project, I thought that eventually the images, the series would have found its own audience, and so I'm glad that it has reached so many people.
Okay, and another question is about museums, and in general, the museum cannot be seen as a natural institution. In a way, it's an expression of a modern colonial power. It holds epistemic and aesthetic power. In a way, you find inside the museum, I think that we find inside the museum the history of the West and the construction of white suprematism. But now we need another way to leave the space, the museum. And I want to ask you, for your perspective, what can we do here in Europe? The colonial, anti-colonial museum. What's the next from museum interpretation? Because it's a big challenge. It's a big issue, and for me, it's not really free space for Black people. When you enter, for example, in the Louvre, or you enter in any museum, you know that museum is not built for you. So I want to ask you about museum for that reason.
I'd say for me, it's about representation, and so seeing yourself reflected in the space and in the narrative. And if you're not there, then you're not going to feel at home, welcome. And I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of listening to communities, and when I say listening, I think it's more than the odd project to tick a box. It's about really building communities into the fabric of the building and the thought of the space, the culture of the space and the conversations that institutions are willing to have, and how far are we willing to go in terms of those conversations. So that's definitely something that I'd like to see more of here, is that a sense that we all feel as if we have a part to play in these institutions, and we can all take an ownership of these spaces.
And you, Mr. Imani, what do you think about museum? And above all, I want to ask you, what do you think about Italian museums?
Oh,
Yeah.
So I think I do agree. I do agree with what Mr. Brathwaite said, and I also think that it also important to look at the issue of restitution, because when I go to, for instance, at the Louvre, and I see it, and I look at African artifacts, for instance, like a lot of people don't ask themselves how these artifacts arrived at the Louvre. And so I think we have to be very cautious on how this act of looking is like this act of looking participate in this whole colonial project and imperial project. So I guess that in the way we look at the artifacts that have plundered from the colonies, we have to try to deconstruct the false narrative that museums have attached on this artifact. And to going back to the question of Italian museums, I really don't go to Italian museums because
Why?
Because going back to what Mr. Brathwaite said, there are very few artworks that few artworks that I see myself represented or reflected. So I don't usually go to Italian museums. I go to galleries to look at contemporary works of art, but I don't really step into the wide space of Italian museums.
Yeah, but one day, if you came to my city, Rome, we went to go together to Palazzo Massimo because we have a lot of museums so interesting. For example, for history of Roman Empire. Really, I want to become your guide. I have maybe yeah, and I have only two final questions. One is so funny, but you have a time machine for 24 hours. Where do you go? Yeah, I know. I want to come back to Roman Empire to see, multicultural and transculture of Roman Empire, because I'm so interested. I'm Roman, and I'm so interested to see my city 2000 years from ago.
I suppose maybe I'd like to go back to 1817 to Barbados, and my ancestor, my fourth great-grandfather, Addo, was a Ghanaian man who gained his freedom that year, and he bought it himself. And I'd love to talk to him about the circumstances of that and the experience that he had up until that point.
Yeah. And you, Mr. Imani?
Really tough question.
Yeah, I know. Maybe Venice during the Renaissance. I don't know.
I'll go back to the 1500s, but still here in Verona. because I'm from Verona. I was born here, and there's one painter, a Veronese painter, who is Paolo Veronese, who was a famous painter of the Renaissance. And one funny thing that I read about him is that he used to travel to Venice to find black figures to paint, because there were no African people in Verona. So I would just go back to the 1500s in Verona, so I could be the favorite model of Paolo Veronese.
Oh, this is interesting plan. And I want to see some images of your project. Maybe this is the time, because we have some images to show, I think. And if you want to comment a little bit, Peter, Mr. Brathwaite, if you want to begin, or Mr. Imani.
Yes. So with the images that I've chosen to show here, there's an image by Sonia Boyce from the 1980s, and I'd say that this is one that I connected with in a very different way, because it's an example of a black artist taking control of the narrative, and it's called Rice and Peas. And Sonia Boyce also has Bajan heritage, and it's of a woman holding a spoon of the artist, a self-portrait, and below is a list of foodstuffs, so Caribbean foodstuffs, and also British foodstuffs, and it's an exploration of identity. Another favorite is the one that's on the screen at the moment, of another musician, of Joseph Johnson, the man with the ship on his head, and he was singing on the streets of London in 1817, around that time, and that was how he earned his living, as a street performer in Covent Garden. And there is a lot of discussion about how he could have been protesting against slavery and enslavement by wearing this ship on his head.
Wonderful. And you, Mr. Imani, if you want to comment a little bit your images.
I think there is the one where is a snapshot of me taken in kindergarten, and the photo is juxtaposed to the black magus painted by Hieronymus Bosch, and I don't know if you can see the image, but I just find it funny to juxtapose those two images, because the photograph of me was taken, yes, in kindergarten during a Christmas play, and in that play I portrayed Jesus, and so I think it's funny to consider how we can think of Jesus portrayed as a black figure, and not only the magus as a black figure, and also the previous image where there is a photo of me and my father, and the image is in conversation with a Flemish painting, and also this pairing, I just stress the idea of representing Jesus not as a white figure, but as a black figure, and of course it speaks of shared dignity and shared aspiration.
Yeah, wonderful, really. And at the end of this conversation, can you recommend us some books, or in a case museum or book art? What do you want, really? Mr. Brathwaite?
I'd say I'd recommend this book. It's called Black Imagination.
Black Imagination, wow.
By Natasha Marin, and Natasha Morin curated this project to collect recollections of Black experience and Black imagination, and it's a really eye-opening experience to read this. This is another book called The Sugar Barons, and it's a survey of colonialism in the West Indies by Matthew Parker. And another one I have is Black Tudors by Miranda Cowell.
That's wonderful. I love Black Tudors. It's a really wonderful, wonderful book. Yeah. And you, Mr. Imani, you have some
yes, I have.
So, yeah.
This one, Migrating the Black Body, is a collection of essay that tackles the different, the representation of Black figures in different parts of the globe and different time of history. Then I have this one, Committed to Memory by Sherry Finley. And she examines the way in which the plan of the slave ship has been reinterpreted and reimagined by African diasporic artists. And I think this, the image of the Black and Western art, part 3.
Yeah.
Like this is this is part one of part 3, and I started with this one because in this one there is Professor Paul Kaplan that speaks of the representation of the Black figure in Italy between the 1490 and the 1700s. So this is my favorite of the series.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I enjoy a lot this conversation. And you have to remember this. You both of you have a guide in Rome and in Venice. If you want, I'm a perfect guide. And you discover a lot of museum, Mr. Imani, in Italy. I want that you discover some museum in Italy. And thank you so much. And I hope to see you in Venice one day.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.